Today's episode is about whether or not you should start an LLC and when you should start the LLC. This is one of the most common questions I get, and not just in my DMs, but also when I'm just going somewhere at a party or we're just talking shop somewhere, whether it's with a group of people. This is a very common question because honestly, people just don't know what the answer is and they don't even know what an LLC is. And sometimes you might perceive your sole proprietorship to be an LLC or to be an entity, and it's not. So let's talk a little bit about that today, on whether you should get an LLC, when you should get one if you need one, and why it's important to get it if you even need it. Well, a limited liability company is also LLC, is there for protection purposes. It is a type of entity filing that you do with your Secretary of State. By default, if you start a business with somebody else or just yourself, it is considered to be a sole proprietorship or a general partnership. And that is a default setting. That is not an entity per se. That is just a fancy word for you're in business. And the reason is because you actually have to do a filing with the state to let them know that A, you exist, and also to get protection that an LLC might be giving you. Now, like sole proprietorships, your assets and your liabilities are yours. There's no protection, there's no extra company protection that's coming out of there. If something were to happen, somebody could go after your personal assets and your personal liabilities all jumble into one thing. Whereas, if you get an LLC, you have the company protection so long as you are also not commingling funds and you are not doing any illegal activity that would basically pierce that veil that you have with the protections that are given to you by law. So it's called the corporate veil and piercing it. And there are some ways that you could pierce that. Generally, they're illegal activities or intentional malicious behavior that you're doing that would cause the funds to be commingled or embezzlement, something like that. So hopefully none of that is happening. But what we do need to be careful is that is an LLC really make sense for you? Because it doesn't make sense for everybody and it's not necessary for everybody. And let me tell you one more thing. LLC requirements are different in every single state. So what Texas might require may not be the same case for California or the state of Washington or for Idaho or for Delaware. So things are changing and states' laws and requirements are different also. Now in Texas, where I practice law and where I'm licensed to practice law, you have a one-time fee for LLCs, which is $300, whereas in other states, you might have to have an annual fee or annual upkeep of your LLC. Or when you are registering and you are filing, you have to notify and publish it with everybody also. So there's some requirements that are pretty particular to certain states and there are nuances that you have to follow. So just make sure that you go onto the Secretary of State's website for your state and see what their requirements are in order to make sure that you're in compliance with them. Now, LLC, of course, like I said before, may not be something that is needed for your business. So how do you know if you need an LLC? And especially if you're doing something on the side, like this is your side hustle, this is your side gig, and you have a full-time 9 to 5, but what you're doing is a side gig, and you're like, do I really need an LLC? Do I need to invest in that? Well, like I said earlier, the investment is generally not that much as if you were investing in a corporation. Now, if you were to change your business into a corporation filing or entity, that investment is not just money investment, but it's also time and annual compliance investment, and also certain types of meetings that are required of you, and the way things are set up are also different from an LLC. So corporations is going the next level, and you need to really make sure if it makes sense for your business to even be a corporation. But we're not talking about that today. What we're talking about is the LLC. And so the maintenance of an LLC is really not as much as some other types of entity formations out there. However, like I said, you need to go check with your Secretary of State and make sure that what are the maintenance, what is the requirements for the annual, if there are any, and what is your annual fees. And generally it's minimal, it's an investment in your business because that $300 in Texas will give you protection that a sole proprietorship does not give you protection of, especially if your business is exposed to high risk. So that takes me to, how do we know if the LLC is supposed to be for us? Like, when do we know we need an LLC? And whether you're part-time doing a side hustle gig or whether it's turned into a full-time business, you need to see what your exposure levels are and also your tax consequences. Those are the two main things that you really need to look at. There's other stuff there too, but really focus on those two things, because your exposure level is the risk, the liability exposure that you have. What do I mean by that? So if you have a brick and mortar business, you have a standalone shop somewhere, and you have a place where there are, people coming in, and you could have clients that are coming in, say you have a pedicure, spa, manicure type of a place. Now, you first have to make sure that you have the proper licenses to even start that company. Number two, you also want to make sure that you are, in compliance with the health requirements. But because there's health issues there, because you're touching people's body parts, whether it's just doing a pedicure and a manicure, you need to make sure that you are protecting yourself and your personal assets and not exposing them so much where if someone were to get some type of a bacteria or some type of health issue, or something were to happen to them because of something that happened in the company while they were getting the services done and they got hurt, or someone was just to slip and fall in your business, who's going to be responsible for that? You want the company to bear the burden of the liability that comes with that, and not your personal assets as the owner or as a co-owner. And so that way with the LLC, you can separate the entity, which is the LLC, from the owners or the members, which is probably you or somebody else or a group of you. And so that is what the LLC does. It protects you. It adds a veil of protection right there for you. And so it helps when you have high exposure. Now, if you are in a professional business, if you are a coach, health coach, a business coach, something where people could easily say, hey, I did XYZ because of you, you need to make sure you have protection. You need to make sure your protection is well. And so one of the ways to protect your business and to mitigate issues is to have an LLC. That is one of the strategies you can use in your business to protect it and to protect your personal assets as well. So it's a strategy that is integrated into your business. It's not something that you think afterwards. It is something that you do beforehand. And so other ways where on the flip side, you may not have too much exposure to liability is maybe if you're a photographer for a newborn, or you're a photographer for stock photography and you're selling stock photography online, or something like that, where the liability, you still have some liability. Liability exists, but your exposure to that liability is very minimal, because the liabilities that are out there that could potential risks that you could have are very minimal to somebody who might even be doing wedding photography. Wedding photography does have a higher risk compared to maybe stock photography, because they're actually providing clients with something that is part of a very emotional experience in their life. And everybody wants to capture all the beautiful parts of that ceremony and that event. And sometimes the emotional aspect can add on to extra exposure to risk, because a lot of times disputes happen because of the emotional factor behind an issue, and not necessarily only the principle or the actual infraction that is being caused legally. So keep in mind those type of different liability exposures that you could be having. Actual injuries, emotional issues that pop up that can bring about liability issues as well. Money risk liabilities that you could also have in your business. Accountability and warranties that you might be giving, or implied warranties that might be existing in your business as well, or in the industry that you're working in. So if you have, say, I'm in Texas, I'm in Houston, so there's a lot of oil and gas companies here. And if you're in anything in oil and gas, there's a lot of risk and a lot of exposure to liability at that time. You want to not only have a great setup for your entity where you as owners are protected, but you also want to have amazing contracts. You want to have fantastic insurance, because all of that will literally be the tools in your tool belt when there is a problem. Because not one thing will only protect you. There's a group of things that when put together will really edify your space that you're in and the strength of your platform that you're standing on also. So with that being said, these are the things that you're looking out for: is liability exposure and also tax consequences. Tax consequences is something that you're going to really talk to your accountant about, because after a certain threshold, even as a sole proprietor or even as an LLC, you may have to switch over to an S Corp classification for tax. And S Corp is a classification for tax. It's not a entity formation. I know there's a lot of confusion on that, but you want to see the tax consequences. Talk to your accountant, talk to a bookkeeper who can give you a better idea with the business setup that you're in and the industry that you're in, and see what makes sense for you. And so those are some of the things that you're looking at. So really it doesn't matter if you're doing part-time or full-time. What really matters is the exposure that you have at the end of the day to risk, exposure that you might have to liability. How big is it? How small is it? And what is your threshold of what's okay for you? Some people don't have any threshold and they're really risk averse. So then you might want to take the safest route. But if you're okay with a little risk and facing that versus everything else that might be there on the other side of the pendulum, you do what works for you best and see what works for your business, the way your business is set up, and the industry that you're in. So I know that this was helpful for you, and I hope that we can share these helpful tips with your friends and family and other people. So share it on your Instagram, on your social media, tag GBP Law. I will love to see this, and I'd love to hear some comments and feedback. So leave some comments below, leave a review, subscribe, share the love, guys. I really want this information to be spread out to others so that way they're not missing out on building a stronger business for themselves and getting some legal and business strategies along the way for free.